The aftermath of a deadly American drone strike in Pakistan. Images like these have soured US-Pakistan relations for almost a decade. No Pakistani official has ever acknowledged sanctioning US drone strikes until now.
What you're saying here, on occasion there was agreement?
No, only on very few occasions where the target was absolutely isolated and had no chance of collateral damage.
Pervez Musharraf was Pakistan's military ruler when drone strikes began in 2004 and was bitterly and publicly critical of them. Now he admits there was a secret deal.
One discussed at the military level, at the intelligence level, to strike, and if at all there was no time for our own SOTF and military to act, and that was very, maybe 2 or 3 times only.
Back then, Al-Qaeda and Taliban fleeing US forces in Afghanistan set up camp over the border in Pakistan's tribal region. America and Pakistan had a common enemy and a common strategy: kill militants when they could.
The answer used to be that this was a fleeting target and we couldn't delay the action. I mean, these ups and downs kept going. You see, this is a very fluid situation, a vicious enemy and a fluid situation, mountains, inaccessible areas.
By the time he was forced from office in 2008, Musharraf says he sanctioned only a couple of strikes. The vast majority came under the civilian government that followed him. Since 2003, there have been more than 350 drone strikes in Pakistan, mostly in the semi-autonomous tribal border region close to Afghanistan. There are no precise figures for how many people have been killed, but estimates range upwards of 1,900, and of those, more than several hundred are believed to have been civilians. Most Pakistanis detest the drone program for the loss of life and because it violates Pakistan's sovereignty. Ministers here routinely condemn them.
What I can say today, the world power, the world superpower, is having its own way without having any consent from Pakistan.
But a diplomatic cable obtained by WikiLeaks tells another story, recounting a meeting between the US ambassador, Malik, and the then Prime Minister, Gilani. She wrote, Malik suggests we hold off alleged predator attacks until after the Bajur military operation. The PM brushed aside Rahman's remarks and said, I don't care if they do it, as long as they get the right people. We'll protest in the National Assembly and then ignore it. Musharraf too covered up US drone attacks when it suited him. When militant Nek Mohammed was killed in 2004, the Pakistani army said it killed him in a rocket attack, except it didn't.
But Nek Mohammed killed by a drone or by Pakistani military, US drone?
I think he was killed by US drones. Yes. So, but there was no agreement as such. And every time we did object.
Objections that were frequent, loud and public, but not always sincere. Nick Robertson, CNN, Islamabad, Pakistan.
So how will the issue of drones affect President Obama's legacy as well as Pervez Musharraf's political comeback bid? We're joined now by Akbar Ahmed, a former Pakistan High Commissioner to the UK and Ireland. He's also the chair of Islamic Studies at the American University in Washington and author of The Thistle and the Drone, How America's War on Terror Became a Global War on Tribal Islam. Thank you so much for joining us. First of all, why do you think Musharraf's been speaking like this, and how will it affect what he hopes will be a comeback? What's he doing here?
I think he is used to speaking, frankly, off the record, and he does sometimes land himself in trouble later. In terms of the reaction in Pakistan, there already is a very, very strong anti-drone position, which is now feeding into an anti-American position. It's not going to help him. He already has a fairly weak political base in Pakistan, and the anti-drone campaign, anti-American campaign is going to then be diverted to the kinds of statements he's making, basically admitting that he was part of that drone campaign. In my book that you mentioned, I have a whole chapter on this, focused on Waziristan. And 2004, when President Musharraf is the president, is a turning point in the tribal areas, called by President Obama the most dangerous place in the world, because that is the year when the drone campaign began in Waziristan. That is the year when the Pakistan Army under President Musharraf was actually sent in full force to try to suppress the people there and the militants, the terrorists and the Al-Qaeda and so on. Now that began the process of militants attacking these people, suicide bombers, the Pakistan Army, then drone strikes and tribal rivalries, which meant that the average person living in Waziristan was actually living through sheer hell.
And because they're so controversial, of course, there's the effect in Pakistan. But in terms of what this means for Obama and his legacy, I've mentioned that, but how does it actually affect how he responded to this very difficult situation in Pakistan?
That's a very interesting question, because anyone who saw him, heard him before he became president would have assumed that with his normal sense of enlightenment, his normal sense of compassion and pluralism, he would be against accelerating the program. In fact, the drone program has really accelerated under him. In that sense, President Musharraf is right. This is the time when drones are very, very frequently being used against Waziristan and having a devastating impact. And he himself has now opened himself to this charge that is he in fact supporting this instrument of death and violence abroad? Because he's obviously acting on the basis of his constituency in the United States, where he must show himself to be tough on security. It's one issue that Americans are very, very keen on in terms of supporting their political figures. And therefore, he's constantly having to prove how tough he is. And that's where the drone comes in. People are not connecting in the United States what's happening over here, that is the sending of the drones, and what's happening over there, the impact of the drones on ordinary people. I'm not talking about the targets, I'm talking about the unintended targets, the women, the children, who are constantly being killed.